Forget Die Hard. Why aren't we arguing about if this counts as a Christmas movie? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today we're going to be continuing my Conjuring universe review series with the 2016 supernatural horror sequel, The Conjuring 2. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Conjuring 2 stars Vera Farmiga, Patrick Wilson, and Madison Wolfe, and was directed by James Wan. Drawing upon another of Ed and Lorraine Warren's cases, it tells the story of their investigation of a haunting and possession impacting a family in Enfield, London. The first Conjuring film was a game changer for modern horror. It was a tense, extremely well-crafted movie that was high on atmosphere and low on overplayed modern horror tropes. The extensive case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren offered a wealth of interesting and terrifying stories to dive into, so it really wasn't a surprise that a franchise blossomed from that original film. I loved that first movie, so I was really looking forward to more Conjuring films, but after the fairly disappointing Annabelle spin-off, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about The Conjuring 2. Luckily, those concerns were unnecessary, because this third Conjuring universe film is a return to form, and almost as good as the first movie. Sequels are a tricky thing, even more so in the horror genre, but this movie does an excellent job of retaining the look and feel of its predecessor while never feeling like a rehash or a carbon copy of it, which is actually really impressive considering we're dealing with another haunting/possession story. Maybe it's the location change, or maybe it's the more direct focus on the kids and the family, but I think what helps keep the sequel feeling as distinct as it does is actually the shift in approach. Part of what made the first Conjuring movie so good was how real all of the characters felt. You could relate to and empathize with the family experiencing the haunting, and the Warrens seemed incredibly professional and competent. And all of these things still hold true for the sequel. But the first movie had this almost clinical feel to it once the Warrens came onto the scene, which I think worked really well in the context of that story, because there was a bit of a mystery subplot that was being uncovered through the course of their investigation. The Conjuring 2, on the other hand, is a much more emotion-forward film. The scares are more tangible, and there's this cloud of doubt that enshrouds the whole story and has an impact on all of the characters, but especially on Lorraine Warren. Those heightened emotions really changed the dynamic of the film. It's still creepy and still retains most of the positive aspects of the first movie, but gives it all a more personal feel, especially when it comes to the Warrens. Much like the first movie, this one takes its time to establish its two stories separately before bringing them together. On one hand, we've got the family being terrorized by supernatural forces, and on the other hand, we've got the Warrens dealing with both skeptics and unsettling premonitions, each of which sowing some doubt in their minds. Lorraine is especially affected, and given what we know about her character, there's something extra impactful and scary seeing her get so rattled by the various things happening. And that comes across to the viewer. We're not only freaked out by the classically scary things happening, but also the more personal fears that Lorraine is experiencing. Once again, I think Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson do a fantastic job in their roles. They're believable as paranormal investigators, but this movie expands greatly upon their relationship too, even outside of their job. These two have great chemistry together and are really believable as a near perfectly paired married couple. That shift towards emotions also results in another secondary shift. Rather than the very slow, atmospheric buildup we experienced in the first film, The Conjuring 2 jumps into the bigger scares fairly quickly. That's not to say there's no buildup or that there isn't any tension here, but it approaches it in a very different way. The scares are a bit more blatant. There's still some mystery and twists to the story, but the horror elements are much more visually apparent this time around. And that works really well at times. The early poltergeist activity, the incredibly creepy nun, but the visual blatancy is a minor detriment at times too. Not only does it take away some of the fear of the unknown, but there are actually a couple moments of strangely executed CGI that feel very out of place in a Conjuring movie, and personally pull me out of the period movie feel a bit. Putting those few moments aside, though, this is another impressively crafted film from the technical side of things. I really love the cinematography in both of these Conjuring movies, and we're treated to some more immersive long takes and tracking shots that really put us into the story with the characters. I know that kind of thing can come across a bit gimmicky sometimes, but when it's done well, like it is here, it's a fantastic way to make a more personal connection with the audience, because it prevents us from viewing the movie purely as an outsider. There are also some excellent transitions, including probably my favorite shot in the whole movie, where we get a night-to-day transition done completely in camera with one long extended take. And of course, this wouldn't be a Conjuring universe film if it didn't feature music from some of my favorite bands. The Hollies and The Clash? I mean, come on! Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one has gotta be Ed and Lorraine Warren. I love them in the first movie, but they really get fleshed out quite a bit more here. And really, they make the pros list for two distinct reasons. First off, Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson give great performances, and I still think they were perfectly cast here. And secondly, I really like how the story dives more into Ed and Lorraine's relationship, and how they play off one another. They each bring something different to the table, both personally and in their job, and it's only by putting them together that they're the most effective. The second pro is the cinematography. I know you're probably sick of hearing me gush about this with these movies, but I can't help it. I absolutely love the look and feel of these films, and the camera work is a huge part of that. There's just something so satisfying about watching a beautifully executed transition or a complex long take and knowing how much meticulous planning went into making it a reality. The cinematography is the standout here, but much like the first film, the sound design, costumes, and even set design all help enhance the story too, really taking us to creepy 1977 London. On the con side, the only true issue for me was the iffy CGI, which was basically confined to the Crooked Man. In an Insidious movie or some other modern set horror film, it wouldn't have been all that bad, but the CG just really stood out in this movie, to the point that it pulls you out of the story. It's just so strange to have such a precisely crafted, period-accurate set, and then see a gleaming, computer-generated monster traipse through it. Luckily, we only see the CGI in a few shots, so it's not as bad as it could have been. And this segues to my second sort of issue, the blatancy. I say sort of issue because this didn't really detract from my enjoyment of the movie, but it is a bit of a step down from the scare style of the first Conjuring film. I think we see a little too much of what's happening here. That was one of my biggest complaints about Annabelle, and I will say that I don't think this movie gets anywhere close to Annabelle in this regard or any other, but I do think the tension and overall atmospheric dread could have been heightened if some of the events or monsters were left up to our imaginations. This movie ends up being perhaps more visually scary than the first, but I do think it loses some of that guttural, visceral dread and unease. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying The Conjuring 2 or any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm going to give The Conjuring 2 4 out of 5 paws. This is another really solid Conjuring film. It maintains a lot of the positive aspects of the first film, but changes up enough that it doesn't feel like a carbon copy, and instead has its own unique identity and feel. I would recommend The Conjuring 2 to fans of the first Conjuring film, or anybody who wants a good, recently made horror film. I don't think it's quite as good as the first movie, but it's got a lot of similarities from a technical standpoint, and of course, if you liked Ed and Lorraine Warren, you get a lot more of them here. It's nice though, because you don't need to have seen the first film to understand this one. It would offer a little elucidation on the characterization of the Warrens, but this functions perfectly well as a standalone film in case you haven't caught the first movie or just haven't seen it in a while. If you liked The Conjuring 2, I would recommend, perhaps obviously, The Conjuring. Not only does that film provide our introduction to the Warrens and this universe, but it's another really well-crafted, scary story that stands apart from many other modern horror releases. If you enjoyed the introductory investigation of the Lutz case, you should definitely check out the Amityville Horror. It's one of the classic haunted house possession films, and is centered on a very publicized real case that drew much skepticism. And if you really liked Valak, you'll obviously want to check out the spin-off film, The Nun. Much like Annabelle, this movie serves as a prequel to the character, and much like Annabelle, the film isn't all that close in quality to the Conjuring movies. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Conjuring 2? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite horror sequel? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.